said I'd be babysitting a... No, I must have misheard you. Where's the child? Child? Stephen laughed. We don't have children. You heard me correctly, George. Just watch the machine for a few hours, Susan said. That's all. Isn't it, Steve? Indeed, Susan, Stephen chuckled. Honestly, this new generation, you'd think they could handle babysitting a washing machine, wouldn't you? You would, Susan laughed. Perhaps we should write it on a piece of paper for him. He probably needs to be told through the medium of TikTok, Stephen said. The pair of them laughed, and I sniffed the irritated half that was itching to emerge from my tightly compressed lips. They were insufferable, but 200 per hour of babysitting was a staggering offer. It would have been staggering if I'd been offered that much to care for an actual person, but a washing machine. Let them have their fun, I thought. I was certain I'd have the last laugh. And so I bit my tongue. No, I said, smiling. I think I've got it. Good lad, Stephen said, ruffling my hair in a protagonizing fashion. May I take your coat? I shrugged, but Stephen had already slipped it off my shoulders before I could respond. He disappeared upstairs, which seemed a little peculiar, given they had a coat stand by the door, but I didn't question it. We'll see you at 11 o'clock, okay? Susan asked. I nodded, waving as they left. I lifted a middle finger as soon as the door was shut behind him. I was about to make the easiest 800 of my life. Maybe more, if they stay out longer, I thought. Stephen and Susan Hall had always been the oddballs of the street. Nobody really knew them, and despite their insistence to the contrary, I could have sworn they have kids. Tim and Rachel. Mom and Dad seemed to think not, which is they were confused when the Halls offered me the babysitting gig over the Christmas break. When I found myself eyeballing a washing machine in their kitchen, I started to realize that my parents were probably right. There had never been a Tim or a Rachel, but I wasn't complaining about the bizarre request. As a broke university student, the thought of making eye-watering money in a single night had me salivating in seconds. As soon as the Halls popped around to make the offer, I rushed over to their house at the end of the street without another thought. Anyway, after that rude conversation with the Halls, I initially planned to not even bother babysitting the washing machine, but I was so glad I eventually peered through the awful window because I was treated to a sight of unexpected hilarity. A mountain of miniature outfits circled the rumbling drum. There must have been hundreds of items in there, all of them too small for any human to wear, and some were far more shranked than others. It was a mismatched collection. Of course, they're washing tall clothes, I thought, laughing aloud. Absolutely not jobs. Of course, I immediately sent pictures to my friends. No way, Johnny replied. Those two are so weird. I can't believe you're not babysitting actual humans. Didn't we play with their kids when we were growing up? Sarah asked. That's what I said to my parents, I replied, but they didn't think so, and Stephen and Susan said they don't have any children. Oh, but they do, Johnny said. They're a beautiful baby washing machine. I snorted. Also, I'm just thinking about the photos you sent, Johnny continued. I think I recognize that teensy tiny t-shirt in the second picture, the one with the green turtle on it. See it? Oh my word, Tim wore that. Well, a larger version of that, Sarah messaged. Yeah, that name rings a bell, Johnny said. My heart dropped. Wait, Tim? Okay, this is getting weird now. I was part joking about them having kids, but that's the exact name I had in my head. Before my friends could respond, the doorbell rang. The sudden ding startled me, and my phone clattered to the tiles below, screen shattering dramatically. I groaned, of course. I scooped up my wounded technological appendices signed at the screen I could no longer read and placed the fallen soldier on the dining table. I stormed to the front of the house, ready to scroll at whoever had unwittingly caused my phone's demise, but when I flung the door open, nobody was there. Though I was certain I could hear a faint, wailing sound in the wind, as if a distant scream were striving to capture my attention. With a heavy sigh, I closed the door and returned to the kitchen, frustrated that a sizable portion of the night's earnings would be going towards fixing my phone screen. I squinted at the device's splintered screen, but it was useless. I couldn't read what my friends had replied. Suddenly my attention diverted to an unusual noise from the washing machine's innards, a sound that was hard to distinguish, though it had some sort of subconscious effect on my body, lining my skin with a wave of goosebumps and upright hair, much like the wailing wind at the front door. It sounded like a chorus of piercing shrieks. I knelt onto the kitchen tiles, signing as my jeans pressed into shattered pieces of my phone screen, and started deeply into the whirlpool of minuscule clouds which filled the washing machine. The rumble of the drum, the rustling of a tire, and the whooshes of water mostly drowned out the mysterious noise. But it was there. I hadn't imagined it. A choral bang of despair. And then I saw something which filled me with a terror unlike anything I've ever experienced. A fleshy creature, half the size of a pinky finger, slithered between two items of clothing. I yelled and immediately fell backwards, unable to pinpoint what I had seen, but entirely certain it was no insect, no animal. I hurried, smashed every button on the washing machine, desperate to end the cycle. I'm not sure why my instinct wasn't to run. My brain wasn't functioning correctly. I waited a few minutes for the water to drain from the drum, watching the steel pile of tiny outfits. My body shook violently, anticipating movement from within the clothing. But there was nothing. No fleshy monstrosity bounced out at me. And then there came the dreaded ding to signify that the door was safe to open. The drenched pile of clothes sat motionlessly, and I spent several minutes summoning the courage to rummage through it. The never-ending piercing sound was louder now. It was a muffled noise coming from the bottom of the clothes pile. I scarcely dared to look. Shrunken garments slipped through my fingers, and it was only upon closer inspection that I came to a horrifying realization. The outfits were stained with blood and some sort of indistinguishable mush. I could feel the vomit rising in my mouth, but I was as uncovered the final layer of clothes at the bottom of the drum lay against the drum. There were hundreds of shrunken bodies, horribly disfigured, bloodied and mashed. But the worst part was that some of the miniaturized victims were still moving. The indistinguishable peach-colored things were people, and the piercing choral sound was that of their screaming. One of the less mangled people began to crawl over the smaller mound of clothes I'd created in the clearing. He was calling to me in a small, feeble voice. "Save us! Help!" he cried repeatedly. I watched in paralyzed fear, trying to decide whether it would be safe for me to reach the palm of my hand inside the drum to scoop out the few people still moving. The man who had wriggled free from the mound of bodies seemed wounded and helpless, but I was terrified of touching that horror scene. With a deep breath, I outstretched my hand, placing it palm side up on the clothes at the bottom, and as the tiny man, along with a few other survivors, clambered onto my skin, I tried to conceal the shivers that spread throughout my body. The first man continued to shout as I steadily lifted my hand closer to my ear, but I soon realized I misheard him the first time. "Not save us, help, save yourself." "What's happening?" I whispered weakly. "What? Didn't you see the grace outside?" the man screamed into my ear. My body shivered as I realized that must have been who rang the doorbell, the tiny voice I heard wailingly in the wind. "It doesn't matter now, just find your coat and get out of here," he screamed in a minute voice. "Why do I need my coat?" I asked, gulping. "Because they'll shrink it to shrink you. I don't know how or why they do it, but it happened to all of us." I moved my hand to eye level, surveying the 6 survivors, 5 of whom were riding on my palm. Only the main man seemed to be in any sort of fit state. Are you team?" I asked quietly. "Wow, oh, the boy, he signed." "No, the Halls put their children somewhere special." "Never mind that, come on, you need to find your code." I looked at the clock on the wall. "Relax, it's 8 o'clock. They're not getting back until 11. "They never went anywhere," the man screamed. In a near synchronized manner, the house's lights extinguished. "Oh no," the small man whispered. "They know." "I'm getting out of here," I said, stumbling through the darkness. "If you leave, the code goes in the next cycle and you become like us," the man warned. "Or worse." And I didn't need to question what he meant. I'd seen the pulverized bodies at the bottom of the drum. Given the inexplicable nature of the tiny human in the palm of my hand, I had reason to believe every last word he'd say. So I made my way across the darkened entryway, opened the front door, and placed the miniature figures on the paving slabs. "Go," I said. I couldn't hear faint painted sounds from the ground as the man said something inaudible to me before helping his injured companions. Then I stepped back into the lightless house, pulling out my shattered phone to use the flashlight. Thankfully, the screen still seemed to register my torch. Making my way up upstairs landing. A door opened at the far end. A darkened bedroom beckoned. I knew it to be a trap, but I had no choice according to the small man I had saved. Not that I could trust him either. "Stephen, Sarah," I called. "I just want my coat, then I'll go." I stepped into a large, lightless, children's room. There were 2 single beds and most horrifyingly a doll on each. Dolls that look exactly like the 2 children I was completely certain I'd never imagined at all, Tim and Rachel. But they weren't dolls, and they weren't alive. They seemed to have been shrunk and stuffed. I threw up on the floor and the light in the house suddenly returned as Stephen and Susan entered the room through a side door. "People are so weak these days," Stephen's voice growled. "This generation sickens me." Susan sniffled. "But not our children. They were pure." I cried. "Why are you doing this to people?" "Why?" Stephen frowned, frothing at the lips and brandishing my coat in his tight grip. "To save our children, you ignorant fool. Your life will finally mean something. And seeing as you couldn't even wait for the next washing cycle, I guess we should head downstairs and start it now." "You're insane. Save them. Your children are dead. Look at what you've done to them," I cried, gesturing at the doll-sized, pale-faced corpses in the beds. Susan shrieked. "Quiet, you fool thing. We didn't kill them. This was the only way to save them." "Save your energy, honey," Stephen said, placing a hand on his wife's shoulder. "It's his turn now, and there's no running for him or his escaped friends. We'll catch them. We always do." Heart pounding, an idea came to me, an idea so horrific that I didn't want to believe it had stemmed from my own brain. I stepped backwards and slammed the bedroom door closed. Then I turned on my heel and ran to the top of the stairs, ignoring the crackling sounds behind me. I scurried down the stairs 2 at a time and beelined for the coat stand by the door, scooping up 2 coats, one for Stephen and one for Susan. Hearing footsteps slowly plodding across the upstairs landing, I darted to the kitchen, realizing I had mere moments before I was caught. I threw the coats into the washing machine, ignoring the blood and guts within, and shut the door. "It's useless, George," Stephen shouted, heading down the stairs. "You won't find any weapons in this house, but you can run. Go for it." I pressed the start button and, in a stroke of genius, hammered the plastic handle of the door, preventing it from being opened. Stephen suddenly emerged in the kitchen doorway, coat in hand and frown on his face. "What are you?" He stopped mid-sentence and dropped the coat to the floor. "No, Susan." I thought I might have to fight them off, allowing the cycles enough time to work its magic, but the horror commenced as soon as their coats began to twirling in the running washing machine. As Stephen spun around in the doorway, his limbs began to crumble inwards, shrinking in a matter of seconds. He screamed in excruciating pain, as did Susan, who was still walking down the stairs. Parts of his skin tore and bled, as had been the case for most of the victims in the machine, and there sounded a series of thuds from the staircase. Stephen, mostly crippled and reduced to half of his size, ran out into the entryway, and I followed as a shivered, pinky-sized, lifeless husk wearing blood and guts on the outside of his corpse. I slammed to the floor of the entryway, eyeing the miniature corpses of the mister of the halls, making sure they were truly dead. And then, after an unknown period of time, I hastily walked into the kitchen, poured a bottle of vodka across the dining table, and set it ablaze with a lighter. The fire spread quickly. As I was walking towards the open front door, I noticed Stephen's wallet on the dresser. There was 80 inside, not quite enough for a new phone screen, and certainly not enough compensation for the horror I endured, but it sufficed. I wasn't willing to spend a moment longer in that house. Crazy story. I hope you liked it. Kisses.